I don't know how many times you've been in this attic, and what we know about what goes on in this house historically, but I just found a door over there that in the closet. Have you seen that little door? Mm-hmm. It's like a doggy door or something.
Oh,
There's a door over there. We'll do a whole episode about it one day. It'll be like an excavation project. But like I was like, I wonder. It was like a movie. I wonder what's in there.
Yes.
And I looked, and it was like really dark, and it was like a tunnel, and I closed it tightly.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So
I was gonna say, I think that there are rumors of ghosts sometimes when people have been working after hours.
really, about this building?
Yes.
Well, it's hard not to think that with buildings like this.
Right. Yes.
And like, I think that's part of the like lawyers in the attic thing is that we're sitting here thinking like, what's gone on in this attic? Because this house has been here a long time. And I feel like Ventura does a lot of ghost tours and stuff like that. Have you ever been on one of those?
I haven't. I look at it every time like the catalog comes out for all this, the community. I'm like, oh, I should do one of those, but I haven't.
I'm trying to now connect ghosts to our topic today because I want to talk to you, and I think it'll work because I want to talk with you about family law and gender, and that's just a huge like dissertation topic, I know. But I want to say from the front that like when I say gender, I don't just mean women. I think a lot of people think like, oh, we're going to talk about gender today, so we're going to talk about women. Like, no, like there is a lot of energy in the culture and in politics aimed at family court. And I'm sure, are you aware of like how big a deal family court is among like men's rights activists and like the divorced dads groups of America? How much do you encounter that in your job?
Well, it comes at, so specifically like the men's rights groups, it'll come up at different times, but I get a lot of, in the initial consultation, the question is asked what my position is about supporting men's rights and whether that's something I advocate for.
By men or women or both?
By both.
I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to think. Are there men? There must be men's rights activist attorneys.
There are.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, each attorney can find their own niche. There are like the Christian advocate attorneys in family law. There are the men's rights. You get labeled as a lot of different things, and sometimes you brand yourselves as a lot of different things.
So, are you a men's rights attorney? You can
I am not. I'm an all rights attorney, and that's probably not not the answer everybody wants to hear. But but I'm familiar with the men's rights group. There are a couple different ones, and then I think the overall feeling in a lot of them that the system is set against them, which does come up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm referring to, even beyond just like any particular group of men's rights guys. I'm more just thinking about like the meme in the culture that like the family law is where men go to get screwed out of their rights and that the system is rigged against them and the judges are always being mean to the dads in these situations. Where does that come from? I mean, I know that you might not know where it comes from, but I'm trying to think of like how your perspective being inside the system, because it seems like that's just a very common like assumption. I mentioned to you earlier that like if you watch like shows like Joe Rogan and stuff like that, like the kind of, I don't know, vaguely manosphere type stuff, it's like just a common assumption. They're like, oh yeah, family court is rigged against men.
Right.
What is your perspective on that from the attorney side of it?
Yes. Well, I think what happens is the person who ends up feeling like they have to pay their money for something that they don't understand feels screwed by the system.
That is such a good lawyer answer, because you're like, if it's this, then this.
Right.
Yes.
But I mean, that's what I run across, because again, on both sides of it, because I usually have the wife or the husband, I equally have upset clients when they are the primary earner and they are women and they have to pay support to their stay-at-home spouse they're just as upset as the male clients who have to pay support to
for the same reason.
For the same reason. They feel like this is their money. They don't understand why they have to pay it to their slacking ex-spouse, and they're mad about it. And it's because there's not an understanding of what that is for and how the system is set up.
Well, what is the answer to that question? Like, why does the person who makes more money have to support their deadbeat spouse after they divorce them and they're done with them?
Yes. Well, so it's broken down into two different aspects. So the spousal support or alimony is probably where people get most upset, though also child support. So on the alimony spousal support end, depending on how long you've been married, what a lot of people don't love hearing about marriages is their business relationships.
You mentioned this last time.
So
it's like
it is
the cold reality.
A partnership, and in that partnership, you have made decisions about the division of labor in that partnership. They may not be as clear cut as an actual partnership agreement would be, but if there is a spouse who left the workforce to be a stay-at-home spouse, caregiver, whatever that is, that was a division of labor decision that you made at some point in that partnership. And whether you liked that that's what was made, that's the reality. And the court has to then acknowledge if there's a spouse who's been out of the workforce for a period of time, they're not going to be able to just hit the ground running and find a job most of the time that they can support themselves. And so then you have to look to the spouse who was working and who was afforded then the ability to probably get ahead in their career because they had somebody who was dealing with the stuff at home. They didn't have to pay for somebody to deal with the stuff at home. You know, like if I need somebody to clean my house, I need to pay somebody to clean my house. But those things are
You're
then
talking about something that seems so key to the whole story of feminism in America is like the unpaid domestic labor element of capitalism. It's sort of like the men, at some point, men are going to leave the home. I'm going back to the 18th century here.
I was like, we're going way back now.
Yeah, at some point they leave the cave, then they leave the home, but they leave the home to work in factories for wages, you know, which that hadn't been before. It had been farming, you know, a different kind of reality. But either way, what that meant was that dude who's now going out of the house to make money is leaving a woman at home to take care of kids, clean the house, do all the kind of economic work that needs to happen for him to do that, but it's unpaid labor.
It is.
So, like, we don't think of it as work. You think, oh, you're a stay-at-home spouse. You don't do anything. The fact that that's still the common thought is pretty crazy. And
that's the problem is the societal impression of the person who is at home dealing with all of the home things. Like, it is a lot to run a home. Even the most basic setup of it. There is cleaning. There is,
That's
meals.
why all those 50s housewives got addicted to booze and pills because it was so fucking boring, but also hard.
Yes.
And just completely, like, thankless in some way. I know it's a stereotype, but there was a movement in the 60s in part against that because it was like, fuck, man, like, people are getting the wrong end of this particular social arrangement.
Yes, absolutely. And that's just on the spousal support alimony side. I mean, when you get to child support, there's an actual calculation that most of the time I think makes sense when you explain it to people. It's, your income, their income, and the percentage of time that you're responsible physically for the kids. Because both of you are required. I mean, in some instances, there are 3 parents, but most of the time it's 2 parents are required to provide emotional and financial support for their children. And so if one parent has 80 or 90% of the physical custodial time, then the other parent is usually going to have more of a financial obligation.
Which makes sense. Like, okay, you're doing a lot of the work of the child.
Right.
I'm free most of the week, so I pay more.
Yes.
Pay my way out of the parenting responsibilities.
Yes. And even in 50-50 setups, if one parent is making $1 million a year and the other parent is working full-time minimum wage, the benefit is for the kids. And so the kids can't be living in a studio apartment in one household and a mansion in the other household and have that be fair to the kids. So a lot of people see it as like, oh, well, you're giving this person money and they don't even need it to cover like the basic needs of the kids. But the basic needs of the kids are far beyond just making sure that they have food on the table. It goes to the lifestyle in which they've become accustomed. And it's never going to be a an equal, like both households are exactly the same. That's a rare circumstance, but it does have to be like somewhat for the kids' benefit.
Just an equity there.
Yeah.
I never understood that. So like the courts are acting in part to like create a little bit of equity in terms of the lifestyle that the kid experiences at both of the places.
Yeah. Because
Are there like cases where there's massive inequity, like like a mansion and a hovel sort of thing?
I mean, I'm sure there are. Yes.
The mansion and the hovel is the name of the next podcast.
Yes. And I mean, in Southern California, it gets even harder because if you've owned your 5-bedroom house for 20 years,
right,
your mortgage is probably less than what it would cost to go and rent a 1-bedroom apartment somewhere.
Oof, yeah.
So like all of those considerations it's hard for the court to scalpel out like the perfect scenario, and so it does become very like, here's the sword, here's the best we're going to be able to do. It's not a perfect system. I won't say it is, but that's the reasoning why, and that's how that calculation is set up, and those are the things that the legislator considered when they established child support. This
is a question about just the practical elements of it, but I guess it kind of hits on some of the ethical and moral elements too. But like when you're representing a client, family court, are you representing you're representing a parent, obviously, one side of this, a mom or a dad.
Yes.
But what is your legal, ethical, what is your relationship to the kids? Like, are you representing them as well? And sort of like, because those things seem like they might butt up against each other sometimes.
Right. And so I don't. There are attorneys who represent kids in family law proceedings. They're usually involved in either really contentious family law proceedings or, I mean, California's public policy is that the children should have a voice in court. Some of that depends on their age and their ability to do that, or the court's need to hear it in certain circumstances. So I'm not directly representing the kids, but there are ongoing discussions that I have with my clients about making sure that we're considering what is truly in the best interests of their children moving forward, because the reality still exists outside of whatever happens in court, that most of the time you're having to still co-parent with this person. You are still going to see them. There are going to be graduations. There are going to be school plays. There are going to be things that are going on. And so I think I probably said this last time too, like the quicker that you can move through the anger against your ex about whatever the circumstances are, and there have been and are truly horrible circumstances for why you can't be with that person anymore, or why that's not going to work. But we are talking about like, okay, I understand that this is your position, but like, let's walk through. Is this really in the best interest?
Do you have to do a lot of convincing? Like
Sometimes,
there's a lot of people who don't. I mean, I guess I'm kind of trying to think of like, what are the factors that go into thinking what's in the best interest of a child?
Right. And it's a child I don't know that I've never spoken with and likely will never speak with.
Oh,
so it's hard.
tricky.
It's hard to know. Most of the time, if the reasons that are given for something sound plausible, you're like, okay, that makes sense to me. You know, like, yes, this particular kid really loves doing X, Y, and Z. And so we should be able to support them doing X, Y, and Z, even though the other parent doesn't want to pay for it. So how do we, all of those things are kind of moving through the process. And yeah, sometimes people just want a certain percentage of custody, and it's because they want to reduce what they have to pay. And that's difficult. And you have to talk through all those things too, because that's not necessarily what's best for the kid.
Right. And it just seems like there's so much emotion invested in this dynamic because this ostensibly these relationships started with romance. As much as we're sitting here talking about it's a business sort of relationship, most people find partners not through necessarily business thinking, although maybe they do.
I was like, that's why nobody likes when I say that. I fully understand that. But
right.
Yes. And, a lot of times what is probably harder is the people who didn't really have a relationship. So you're having to co-parent with somebody that you maybe dated for a couple weeks or not at all. And then
that's right. We're talking about like these divorces, but there's so many people who are just have kids. And
yes.
That's tricky.
Yes.
And they never speak to each other again, but they have a kid that they have to, and the court is, I feel like that's where a lot of that anger comes from people that are like, I got ripped off. I slept with a woman once, and now I'm like, I've heard that everywhere. it seems like you have to deal with that
Yeah,
one way or another.
you do. Because it is still the responsibility of two people
Right.
having brought that person into the world.
Right.
That kid didn't ask to be brought into that situation.
He'll probably say that at some point.
Probably. Definitely to a therapist somewhere down the road.
One of the things that I sent you when we were thinking about this is and it's kind of a touchstone in the culture of this sort of thinking, is a Kanye West song, which I realized when I looked it up, it's from 2005, which is like, almost 20 years ago.
Yes.
So if anybody remembers the Kanye West song Gold Digger, it's honestly, I think it's his biggest hit. Looking at the lyrics, and I remember always thinking about this song. I'm like, this song is like a thesis about family law. And I have the lyrics because these lyrics, I just wanted your response because it's in the song that he says the following words. 18 years, she got one of your kids, got you for 18 years. I'm not going to do the rap. I know somebody's paying child support for one of his kids. His baby mama's car and crib is bigger than his. You'll see him on TV any given Sunday. Win the Super Bowl and drive off in a Hyundai. You know the song.
I do.
It's a catchy song.
It is a catchy song.
But I'm also like, wait a second. Doesn't this kind of repeat a little bit of what we're talking about here? Is this common feeling that like there's going to be a woman who's going to trap you somehow.
Yes.
And family law and the whole system of family court helps her do that.
Yes.
I think you probably disagree with that.
Well,
and yet it's there.
Because it's one individual taking zero responsibility for their part in why a kid was born.
Right. Because he had sex with a woman.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So
yes.
there is some accountability missing from that.
Right.
The
line is literally, she got one of your kids.
Yes.
It's not, I got her pregnant through
No.
having sex with her.
No.
And now I have a response. It's instead, she got one of my kids.
Yes. It is the person who has 0% chance of dying in childbirth complaining about
Oy.
bringing a kid into the world.
Yeah.
Which is its own problem. But yeah, I mean, I understand that beyond it being a catchy song like that is the feeling from a lot of it. But it does come down to the court system tries to come down to accountability for this individual who didn't ask for this setup, didn't ask to be brought in. And so, yeah, if you have a one night stand and you happen to be an NFL player and you have a really good chunk of money coming in, you're going to pay child support. And it's going to be a number that probably most of us would be like, what? Where do I sign up? I would love to get that amount per month. But
Right.
it's because it's that balancing of making sure that the child, as much as possible, is sort of living a similar situation in both of the households.
Your dad's an NFL player. You'll never see him, but we live in a nice house. That's probably, that seems like where the gold digger thing is coming from is rich men, actually.
Yes.
Like, Kanye's a big rapper guy. He's saying, someone could do this to me. Someone could trap me. Some, person who's poor. The class element of it is,
It's problematic.
yes, it is.
It's problematic.
It is.
Because there's also the power dynamics of taking advantage of somebody who's not in a similar position to you. Kanye is a perfect example. I believe I don't know the exact amount, but he pays child support.
Yeah.
And I have seen on Reddit and oh my God, I don't understand. She can totally take care of those kids on her own. And that's not the point. Because I think also their custody situation, again, not actually seeing the documents.
Yeah.
So I'm going just based on Google research, which
Sure.
can be problematic.
You can make up anything these days. I'm like, this is what I
Right?
heard. If
This
you say
is what I
what I
heard.
heard,
This
and
is-
that's enough.
This is what Google told me. But I think she has majority custody
Yeah, I think
of
so
the
too.
kids.
Uh-huh.
So that's the offset is she has majority custody, which is the physical care.
Yeah, but they have people taking care of
I
the
also hear that
kids.
argument,
She never
yes.
touches those kids. She never sees them. Oh, God. It seems like just an endless kind of space for people to fight. And that's what family law is.
Yes. Well, yeah, because you have all the different, beyond, and, it's probably a later podcast, but beyond just the financial aspect, when you're talking about the division of custodial time, there's almost always a default like primary parent, the one who's made all the doctor's appointments, the one who schleps them around to all of their sports events. And, then there's the parent
I haven't heard the word schleps in a long time since I moved from New York, actually.
Yes. And then you have the parent who, maybe shows up at the recital, but didn't take them to any of the practices.
Is there like a gender dynamic in that? Because, I mean, my sort of just my general idiot bias, anecdotally, whatever, is that moms are generally the ones who are the schleppers and the ones that are doing that. And, like, obviously there are lots of dads who take that role. But that's part of, I think, one of the men's rights sort of sticking points. They're always like, the judges are always giving the kids to the mom, And that's sort of, I guess that explains why they're mad about paying.
And I have so many moms who are like, I don't understand why the judge is giving him 50% of the time. So both sides are complaining. I think maybe one side might be complaining more loudly or on different platforms that are heard more. But it, again, goes back to the public policy of the state of California, and this is in the code sections, is that it's in the best interest of the children to have frequent and continuing contact with both parents. So
it's not, there's nothing legally written down that says they should be with their mothers if possible.
No, in fact, it's specifically laid out that there shouldn't be a preference based on gender, religion, and any of the normal things that you would think that the courts would give a preference to. Like, it is specified in there. So it is supposed to be...
It's pragmatic.
Yeah. Joint custody, as long as that's in the children's best interest. Obviously, there are situations where we have abuse and things like that, where that's not in their best interest. But by and large, the court is trying to figure out your personal life and what's going to work best for your kid, and that whose schedule is going to be able to accommodate what. And, if one parent has more flexibility in their work and can do those things, then they may end up with more time, but a lot of times we're just looking at figure it out on your time. Like, it's week on, week off. You figure out how your kid gets to piano on your weeks, and they figure it out on their weeks, and that's it. So
a lot of people can't figure that out, though.
No.
Right? Like, they need help. I'm not taking the piano. I'm not that sort of thing, right?
Right. And that gets back to thinking about the kid and what the kid wants. I mean, sometimes they're in these things and they don't want to do them either. But if it's something like, hey, they've been in dance for 5 years, and all of a sudden this other parent comes in and says, this is dumb. I don't think they should be in dance anymore. I'm not taking a dance on my weeks.
Come on, man.
Like, that's not thinking about the kid. That's being controlling and trying to spite your ex.
Right. And that's a central motivation for a lot of people, it seems like.
Yes. And they'll use the kids as shields for it. They'll say, well, they said they didn't want to go.
Have you seen very cynical behavior that way in terms of the children used as human shields and pawns? I mean,
well, and the problem is a lot of kids, and some of it's just depending on where they are age-wise or developmentally, but kids are smart, and they figure out what the parent wants to hear to keep themselves out of the middle.
Wow.
And so they'll say totally different things to each parent. And I believe that they're saying totally different things to each parent. And because it's what the parent wants to hear.
That's developing a very particular skill at a young age.
Yes. Well, it's a coping mechanism. And kids are really good at coming up with coping mechanisms.
Well, yeah. And that's so, there's something so tragic about that, though, is like kids developing almost like legal strategies to sort of manipulate the situation.
Yeah.
The class thing really freaks me out a little bit, because I'm thinking about like how much a judge or a court is likely to think that the best interest of a child is to be with a parent that has more money, bigger house, access to better schools, all the kinds of things we associate with class and kids. Because we know that kids do better when they come from people with money, and that's pretty straightforward. Although,
well,
I say do better. I mean in a material way. But yeah, that's
a whole different can of worms, probably.
It is, right? Because now I'm thinking about how much I just can't stand most people that were raised with money, and how socially destroyed so many of them are. But I'm just thinking about the practical element of like, oh well, a kid obviously should go with the parent that has more money and has more resources.
Yeah.
That seems like the best interest.
I don't see that come up a lot. I have clients or opposing parties who want to argue that.
Right.
But again, that's part of what child support is sort of there for, to help not equalize, but to help assist so that it's not such a obvious disparity of households. The only time it really comes up is if there is a true like safety or health issue with a living situation. And then it does have to be considered because you're looking at the best interest of the children. That includes health, safety, and welfare. So if they're living in a car on Skid Row and the other parent has a house with a bed for them,
right,
at least temporarily, that's going to be something the court definitely considers. There will be openings for when the other parent is not living in their car anymore and has a stable living situation. But that's where it would come in. Otherwise, most of the time, the argument that, well, you only live in an apartment and I have this huge house, the kids should be with me, doesn't go very far.
I assume that not everyone wants the kids with them. Are there cases where?
Yes.
And what is that like?
I mean, I feel like for me, those are probably harder. Sometimes you understand it. And sometimes it's somebody walking away after years of trying to fight for the kids and they just haven't been able to get through because of whatever the issues are. I mean, you're talking like custody evaluations that are extremely intrusive and
what does that mean, a custody evaluation that's extremely intrusive?
So it is an expert who comes in and does psychological testing of the parents, talks to and spends a lot of time interviewing the parents and the kids and any other professionals that may be working with the family. So therapists, doctors, sometimes school personnel if there are issues at school.
What triggers that sort of thing happening to you?
It's a high conflict situation, and it is usually a situation where we don't know the best schedule or what's driving something, and so it's pretty extreme. They're not common, but when you get there, it is so many months of your life and so much money to try and get through that. But I mean, so there are those circumstances where people have been through maybe multiple custody evaluations and it's gone against them, and regardless of how much you try and fix and repair and listen to what the experts are saying, like here's the issue as to why this parent can't have more time, they're not always able to do the work that they need to, and sometimes they do the work and it still doesn't get them there, and so then they just kind of throw up their hands.
Have there been frustrating cases where you felt like it was unfair?
Yeah.
What happened to people?
Yeah.
What do you do with that? That's just the law. That's just the way things go.
I mean, you argue and you find whatever you can to throw in there for the judge to make a different decision, but you're dealing with a lot of different people and their biases and their thoughts about cases. I mean, sometimes a judge has made up their mind before you open your mouth and make any argument.
Don't name names, but are there judges that are like worse than others or better than others for like you going and making certain arguments? Like you sometimes dread, okay, this one is, I know it's not going to go this way because I know this judge feels this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it feels like there are a lot of, and this is what's really gets into the crazy shit, is like there are a lot of like that divorced dad energy, whatever, the people that are pissed about family court on Reddit. They're identifying judges, like specific judges, and like this judge, it could be a man, it could be a woman, but they're like, it almost feels like dangerous because they're like, this judge lives here and like we got to fuck with, that sort of thing. But either way, they're mad at the judges for having what they are alleging is just like it's an extreme bias. And I'm wondering, are there problem judges like that, or is it something that we're like, again, sour grapes, the losers are sort of like complaining that
I think it's
I got
more
shafted.
Yeah, I think it's more of that. I mean, I wouldn't say that any of our judges are so blatantly biased about, things that they shouldn't be.
You get a couple eye roll decisions, though, I'm sure.
Yeah, you're always going to get decisions that you don't agree with the judge because, first of all, the judge is never going to know the case as well as you do.
Right.
But I only know one side of the case because I know what we have. Sometimes I know what they have, but not all of it. And I also don't live with these people, so I don't know what the reality is because it's probably somewhere between what my client is saying and what they're saying. And that's hard for everybody to know. So yeah, there are times where you disagree and you don't think the judge got it right, but we're all doing the best we can with the information we're given. And what's frustrating for a lot of clients is things they think are important to the judge making a decision don't always get in front of the judge, either because it's really not important or not relevant information, or you just can't get it in because you don't have a way to get that evidence in. You don't have somebody who can testify to that. It's, something that they heard from somebody, and you can't always get the information in. And I get that that's frustrating because the judge has then a really limited world that they're making that decision from regarding that case. But yeah, I mean, I know about the Reddit threads, or there's the robing room where a lot of people leave their thoughts on the judges.
The robing room. Is that a subreddit?
Room. No, it's its own website, and it is problematic in its own regard. I don't.
Is it just targeting family law judges?
It's just all judges.
Okay, all judges.
So it's all judges. I mean, I know about it because we will look it up every once in a while when there's an issue. I've had opposing parties put things on there or put things online about the judge or about me, and so you kind of monitor. Yeah, you kind of monitor.
I swear,
like I know the judges monitor the thing. I've heard people who bring stuff up that they've seen on the robing room in front of the judge as if they think that's going to help.
Wow,
their situation.
That's nuts.
Yes,
I saw a TikTok video about you last week, and yeah,
it is.
We're in a different moment.
It's got to be difficult. I mean, I do not envy any of the judges because you're dealing with so many different personalities in that courtroom, and
one of my professors is a judge now. His job sounds hard, honestly. I'm just sort of like there's a lot going on there.
Yes,
and I think you have to be you have to have a certain personality to be a judge.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what that is.
I'm not
like
sure
sort of a remove. Like almost like you seem bored by everything, You're just kind of like there's nothing shocking.
Yeah,
he's like this guy, the judge that is my professor right now is like he's so. I mean, he's like the tarot card of a judge, like just like an archetype of a person who is just calm and nothing is too anything to him.
Right.
It's just sort of like no huge eyebrow raises from him. He's an even-tempered guy, and I'm like this. He's probably on the the robing room.
We could look it up. I often joke. I'm like, I can do that. Like I sit in the courtroom and listen to some of the stuff that they have to do, like because you're waiting for your case to be called.
Yeah,
and I have to like try and turn my head because my facial expressions are just so apparent. I was like, the amount of Botox I would have to have so my face didn't move if I was up there, because there's just no way. Like some of the things that are said or argued or positions taken, I'm just like, what?
And it's weird because like the TV judges, like Judge Judy and like all the things we were raised watching. You remember Wapner?
I do remember Wapner.
You do remember Wapner. So like you were actually looking for the opposite of the even-tempered judge on those shows.
Well, because it's supposed to be entertainment.
I want Judge Judy to smack him down, and you're looking at her side eye the whole time, and like, but you go into a real courtroom, and I've been in them many times, and I'm assigned to go back to them now. It's just like totally different mood.
Yeah.
Not the same, like, I'm not waiting for the smackdown from the judge that's going to, like, get emotional at all.
No. Sometimes it's happened, but you have to get pretty far down the road for that to be the case for most of our judges.
That's the viral video when the judge gets really mad. Like, real judge is mad.
Yes.
I was thinking about clients coming to you because they're your clients and you represent them no matter what. But are there times where you're like, I feel like the kid's best interest would be with the other person, and I have to sit here arguing for my client because my client, in other words, I'm with the wrong guy or the wrong girl in this case, but I have to do it because this is my client? That seems really hard to me.
Yeah. I don't know that that's come up a ton.
Okay. I'm just wondering how much you're feeling like squeamish about what you're doing.
Well, and again, a lot of it is just so hard to know with any level of certainty.
Yeah.
So, I can take what the other side is saying, and you can have those moments like, ooh, that doesn't feel great for us. And if that's really happening, that doesn't feel great for those kids. But I also don't know how much a lot of those things are really happening. And so it's one of those where you're like, okay, well, that's what you were saying.
It sounds like you're really good at like sort of understanding and limiting your role. Like we're not solving as much. So last time we talked about like you're kind of, there's a therapy element to this a little bit. There's a soft side, but there's also like a hard side to it that just seems like, well, I'm just representing this person on the legal end of it, and I'm not solving all of this family's problems because that would be impossible.
Right. Well, I mean, in a mediation aspect, you're looking to try and solve those problems, but that's outside of litigation. Once you get into the court system and you're litigating and advocating a position, you know, if you have the legal authority to support that position, you're going to argue that. If you have the facts, maybe not the legal authority, you're going to argue that. But ultimately, you're trying to get the information in front of the judge, so the judge they have to make the decision. That's their job. It's not my decision to make. There are a lot of conversations that are happening behind the scenes where, you know, maybe we're trying to guide everybody one way or another and see if we can keep the family out of that litigious setup, and make some sort of deal that works in the moment. But the other part, at least with custody, is, you know, kids' lives change drastically from year to year and what they're interested in and what they're doing and what's going to work for them. So it's really always kind of a moving target as to what's going to work for this family in this moment. And that might not work a year from now, and we might be right back at the drawing board trying to figure it out all over again. So, but
do you end up seeing clients again over the years?
Yes. Yeah.
Return customers?
Yeah. I was going to say right now, I think I have a client who, I'm trying to remember how old the kid was when we started it, but I mean, we basically go back every year or so to make adjustments because they just are still unable to co-parent and do it outside of a court setting. That, you know, they have the situation where one parent says the sky is blue and the other says, no, it's not, it's green. Like it wouldn't matter. They cannot agree on anything. And it's hard to watch.
That's why they're not married anymore.
It is part of it, yes. But it's hard to be in that situation.
Is it just animosity that's like distorting everything here?
Yeah.
That's what seems like it makes all of this hard.
Yes. Well, you know, it doesn't even have to be both of them, but it only takes one person holding on to and remaining that sort of entrenched, like, I can't believe you did that to me type of position. And then when you're on the receiving end of that vitriol, it's hard to take the high road. I get it. I was like, look, I fully understand you wanting to just slam them back, but it doesn't ultimately help. And, you know, if they can't get past it, there's nothing we're going to do that's going to make them get past it. That's work they have to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like, I mean, I can hold a grudge for a long time, you know.
Me too.
And it seems like when it's this deep, are there situations though where, and the situations I've heard that like on podcasts and stuff where guys are complaining like, I'm still paying for my ex-wife and we don't even have kids. Does that happen? Alimony, where you're like, because the situation we were talking about at the beginning of sort of like one partner not making very much money and them setting up their lives together, and then 6 years later, that the person who hasn't worked has sort of like lost 6 years of professional career time, etc. It seems really unfair.
Yeah.
But I think people really get upset about that one, especially of like, oh, you're still paying for someone that you were married to a long time ago. I mean, is there a statute of limitations? How many years does that last? Because like Kanye says it's 18 years.
For child support.
For child support.
Yes.
But what about just for alimony?
For alimony, it depends on a bunch of factors. So, again, the public policy for California is that everybody should become self-supporting within a reasonable period of time.
Okay.
That's pretty open to interpretation. And
I need 25 years of that. Yeah.
Right. But there's also, I mean, all of the factors that go into it. Are we talking about people that are getting divorced and they're 63 years old and they've been married for 30 years? Because that person's not going to become self-supporting. Like they've been out of the workforce for 30 years potentially, and they're 3 years away from what is considered a retirement age. Like that's not a reasonable expectation. If you've been married for 2 years, you know, that's a big difference. So there's sort of there's long-term marriages, which is anything over 10 years. And the court is reluctant, at least at the outset, to set any type of end date to support. So it's called permanent support. It freaks everybody out. But it's not permanent in the sense that if you get divorced when you're 40, that you're paying that until you die.
It seems like this is only going to happen if there are like good lawyers getting you that money, right? Like it seems like this is going to be a battle of lawyers eventually, because I mean, it sounds like from everything you're telling me, it's an argument, right? It's like, look, she's young, she has a degree, she could go get a job, she's worked in tech before, versus someone who are like, well, he is older, he has no degree, he doesn't have a lot of prospects for jobs. That's where the argument happens, I guess.
Right. And that's why the court has that discretion. I mean, in the code, there's like 13 factors that the court is supposed to consider, and you
name all 13.
I could probably get close, but you have to walk through all the ones that are related to your case. They're not going to all be related, but that's why it is, the age and health of the parties, the ability to pay, the need for support. Because if you have some separate property inheritance that you received, got $5 million, you're probably not going to need that support from the spouse, even though you were married for a long time. But
right.
So all of those things you have to present to the judge. If somebody's been out of the workforce for a period of time and you think it's reasonable that they should go back and make a certain amount of money, you have to show the judge that they have the ability and opportunity to do that. And there, are ways that we do that, a lot of times using a vocational evaluation. So it's a lot of things that you have to put, and that is what makes it difficult when people are representing themselves, because they don't always know how to get that information in front of the judge. And then the judge, it's hard for the judges too, because then they're working without the information they really need to make that decision.
Right. I mean, that's the job of the lawyer, I guess, is
Yes.
to just completely make that argument.
Yeah. But I mean, most of the time
need.
in family law cases, most of the people who go through family law court are not represented.
Who represents them?
Nobody.
Themselves?
Yeah. There's
That
no
sucks.
requirement.
That seems hard.
I know. There's no requirement. Like in criminal law, you are appointed an attorney, and that is a right that you have. In civil court, that is not a right that you have. And so in family court, there's no requirement that you have an attorney, and that I get makes it hard. They've worked over the last decade or so to try and make it easier for people representing themselves, because the reality is that the large majority of people are representing themselves through this process. But it's still, I mean, we go to law school for several years, we take the bar exam, and then, it's what we do day in, day out in family laws, learn how to present this information and what the court needs. So, yeah.
It seems like so dangerous to go into court without representation to me. It just freaks me out.
It rightly so freaks people out, because it's not like I'm comfortable in a courtroom. I get that my clients or witnesses who are coming to testify are usually not comfortable in a courtroom. And so, yeah, if you're representing yourself and you have to sit up there and look at the judge and try and explain to them what you need to explain and get your evidence in, I can't imagine that feeling. Like it's so hard.
It's terrifying, because it's like, I'm just in my first year of law school. I don't know how to talk to a judge, and I wouldn't. I will never talk to a judge. But I was thinking about this movie Boogie Nights. I don't know if have you seen this movie Boogie Nights? There's a custody scene in this movie with Julianne Moore. I just watched it. I've seen this movie thousands of times. Don't ask. I'm a PTA fan. But Boogie Nights has a scene with Julianne Moore where she goes and it's a family law scene, and there's a judge there, and her ex-husband, has an attorney with him, and the judge says, "Do you have an attorney?" to Julianne Moore, and she's like, "No, I don't." And it just seems like you're already ready for her to get screwed over in this scene, and they start talking about how she's involved in pornography, and he didn't honor the custody agreement because he didn't think the house was safe and it wasn't an appropriate place for a child. They start asking her, are you involved in pornography? Have you been arrested before? And the scene really turns when they start talking about her record. What have you been arrested for? When was that? And you can see her face just crack.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you're fucked. Like, this is not going to go your way. And it seems like, I don't know. When I hear the Men's Rights Act, this is why I wanted to talk with you about gender in the system. I'm sure we'll return to the subject. But, like, I don't know. Whenever I hear the men's rights stuff of, like, men get screwed in this system, et cetera, I was like, Well, I mean, I went to school during the 90s. It was a very feminist moment. And there was a very different sort of tone about this stuff. And particularly what I learned in school was that it's sort of the other way. That the system is often really biased against women, and women are like the ones that are oftentimes seeking to correct these injustices. And this system is actually pretty new. Like, this is like post-60s stuff. There wasn't much of a family law. I mean, there was family law, but not like it is now in terms of no-fault divorce laws and all the kinds of things that were the outcome and legacy of whatever we call feminism in the 60s. It feels like, in part, if I'm just being the editorial guy, that the men's rights movement is in part a reaction to that. Like, it's a backlash to the fact that women have gotten a little bit more power in a system that has been historically rigged against them.
Yes. And I think a lot of what happens in family law is oftentimes a pendulum. Like, the better example of it is the domestic violence laws and the way that the legislator has tweaked and massaged those over the years. And so the shifting from, no, it never happens, to a situation now where the definition is so all encompassing that you can put almost anything in there. So the reaction to the pendulum shifting and then coming back. And so some of it is in which moment you're catching the pendulum swing. Which way is it going? And has it gone too far one way? And that's probably going to be corrected and start to swing back the other way. And
what is this pendulum? What is it? What are the markers that we're swinging back and forth between?
It's the changes the legislature makes, because a lot of those are dependent on the moment that we exist in and the groups that are advocating in Sacramento.
There's legislation that came out of Me Too.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. That movement.
Opening up
That's
a lot of
swing.
Right. Because it changed the statute of limitations to be able to file some of those cases. So
that's right. That's
shift.
the Danny Masterson, that 70s show guy.
Yeah.
I think that we were just talking about it in class the other day, that him being convicted of those rapes from 20 years ago is because of those laws.
Yes.
That changed the statute.
Right.
Of
so,
limitations. Yeah.
So it is an ever-changing dynamic. I mean, some of it doesn't change a lot, but like, we didn't have a separate family code until, I want to say, like 1997. It was just in like the civil code, and then they like had to kind of pull it out. So like, when you read old cases, and a lot of what we still use are older cases that, we still follow, and they're citing, the civil code, whatever. And then you have to like, you know what the family code version of it is, but you have to kind of do that, like moving it forward to find which statute they're referring to. Because, it wasn't its
changes
own
all
thing.
The time.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. I mean, we can see family law, I mean, as a gender battle in some ways, but in a larger sense, it's like it's touching on laws, it's touching on all sorts of shit. I have one more pop culture thing. I mean, they keep popping up in my mind, honestly, but I forgot about this one. I don't know how much of a Weird Al fan you are.
I've seen him in concert.
Are you serious?
My sister was a huge Weird Al fan, and so we would go as a family to see him, but I think I've probably seen him 2 or 3 times.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I've never seen Weird Al. That's like a bucket list guy. It's kind of weird that weird.
Weird that it's Weird Al.
I mean, the fact that this guy, I mean, if you would have told me when I was a kid that like, at some point in my life, Michael Jackson would be like dead and forgotten and Weird Al would still be like making chart hits, like, that's an odd sort of future. But he had a song called Alimony. I don't know if he played it at any of the concerts you went to.
Might have been past when I saw him.
It's the Moni Moni song, though. Like, what is that?
I'm not going to sing on the podcast, which is what you're trying
but
to get me to do, but I do know, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, the lyrics are, here she comes now, wants her alimony, bleeding me dry as a bony pony. I'm going to laugh, I'm sorry. Working 3 jobs just to stay in debt now. Well, first she took my nest egg, then she took the nest. My shoes, my toothbrush, like, it's all just, I'm in debt, I'm in debt, I'm in debt. Like, he did this before Kanye. Weird Al.
Always ahead of his time.
Yeah, right.
Always ahead of his time. Yeah. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And a lot of times it seems that way. Again, like, being in Southern California, I think just adds a layer to this that
Why? It's because California's laws are so different?
no, because it's so expensive. So like when you're looking at
I was thinking like
No.
because of civil code?
No, it's
because
not.
the rent is too goddamn high.
because it's too
here.
damn high. But yeah, like you're taking one household
Yeah.
and then you're taking the same income and having to make two households with that.
It's
Like
impossible.
how does that work?
Well,
It doesn't, but yeah.
This is we'll save this for part 2 on the gender thing, but it's like I have never, and I've told this to many young people too, I never really made it financially in life very well without having a partner.
Right.
And like when my life and career started to come together when I had a full-time partner who became a wife, and then we split bills and split the rent and everything. I honestly don't know how to make it on my own, and like that part of it, I'll be suing for alimony, I guess. No, we'll be married forever, and that'll just be that. But either way, the kind of thought that wow, without this person, I don't survive seems like a common one.
Yeah.
Mixing those two things seems like just a recipe for all the disasters we're talking about.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean that is the reality. You're taking what was once a partnership and one household, and you're trying to run two households on the same setup.
And in certain economic realities, that's not really possible.
No.
That's why we need lawyers.
Yes.
Sort it all out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.